G'day there. Welcome to Inside Business. Well, Australia's not on the edge of a fiscal cliff, but the government does need to increase its tax revenue to climb out of deficit. The new mining tax is not going to help, so a ravenous Treasury seems to have turned its attention to multinational companies that seem to have made the payment of tax optional. And to get the debate going, Assistant Treasurer David Bradbury has actually fingered Google's tax strategies. We'll also catch up with Santos boss David Knox, who's got a huge spending pipeline ahead, just as it seems the resources boom has peaked. And we'll check out the latest from the AGM season, what's behind the switch to cyclicals, and the CEOs who have been selling their shares. Should you join in? Assistant Treasurer David Bradbury did an unusual thing this week. In a speech to the Institute of Chartered Accountants Tax Conference, he described how a particular taxpayer, Google Australia, is going about avoiding tax. It's called the Double Irish Dutch Sandwich. And as David Bradbury told the conference, you just have to Google it and you get a YouTube video explaining how it works. Here's a bit of it.
Hi, I'm John with Tax TV, here to explain the Double Irish and the Dutch Sandwich. This isn't a lead-in to a joke or a new food you'll find, but a tax strategy that can help international corporations save money on U.S. taxes. These tax techniques have been used by a number of technology companies, most notably Google.
Now, it gets a bit complicated after that, but essentially what happens with Google, according to the Assistant Treasurer, is that Google's clients in Australia actually buy their advertising from an Irish subsidiary of the American company. Ireland's tax rate is 12.5%, which is a lot less than ours. But wait, there's more. Here's the sandwich. There's a second Irish holding company that's controlled in Bermuda, which has no tax at all. The first Irish company pays a tax-deductible royalty to the Bermuda Irish company via a Dutch subsidiary of Google that sits in the middle. And because transfers within the EU don't attract withholding tax, it's all tax-free. Now, after David Bradbury described this snack to an audience that probably knew more about it than he did, Ross Lyon of Rio Tinto got up and said, well, that's all very well, and if you close that down, you might make a bit more from Google, but what if the Chinese government decides to tax Rio and BHP at the source of their sales, that is, in China? You'll be in real trouble then. The question is, and it is a momentous one for all governments in the digital age, are Google's sales in Australia an export from Ireland, in the same way that Rio Tinto's sales of iron ore in China are an export from Australia? If so, the tax belongs to Ireland or even Bermuda. Where does the intellectual property and the business reside? It's not Australia. It's not America. Australian customers of Google are actually dealing with an Irish exporter of search advertising services, one that really does pay a royalty to a Bermuda company via the Netherlands. As David Bradbury told ABC Television this week,
the international tax rules that were created very much for the industrial age are now failing to properly address commerce as we know it in the information and digital age.
Or to put that another way,
all these techniques are legal and used by many international corporations to help reduce taxable income. Now take some time to digest this information and then check out TaxTV.com for more appetizing tax strategies.
Joining me this week, Mike Mangan, a portfolio manager at 2MG Asset Management, a business commentator at The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, Adele Ferguson, and the policy coordinator of the Australian Shareholders Association and a Melbourne City councillor for 4 weeks, Stephen Mayne. Well done getting onto the council there, Stephen.
Thanks, Alan.
Now,
exciting.
Appetising tax strategy is the Dutch sandwich. Now, I mean, it is an interesting point about, you know, where does the, you know, is the tax, if they really are an exporter of stuff, whatever it might be, from Ireland to Australia, then really they've got no way of getting hold of the tax. Isn't that right?
Well, I think it's a matter of fairness. If the rest of the country is paying 30 to 40% tax or higher if you're an individual, and these guys, Google, clearly paying very little, if anything, then they've got to do something. They've got to address it, and I commend them for doing it.
And a lot of countries are actually ganging up on these companies. You've had the UK has had an inquiry into it. They've been looking at Amazon. The US is looking at it because they're all missing out on, you know, billions of dollars of tax.
I don't think there's anything they can do. I mean, the only thing they can do, isn't it, Stephen, really, is to tax consumption. Taxing production, taxing the producers is going to be difficult in the digital age because it's also mobile.
Well, I agree. I mean, you can increase the GST to 15%. The only really easy things you can tax are workers, salaries, land and consumption. But globally, corporates have got huge stocks of capital, and I think the big countries do need to get together to stop Apple, which is the world's most valuable company at $530 billion, and Google worth $220 billion. They should not be minimising their tax with these cute arrangements through tax havens.
They're going to have to go after the tax havens themselves because they don't have treaties with them, and that's the only way they'll be able to do it.
Well, sure, but there's always going to be lower tax places.
But they'll just have to keep going after these different. They'll have to keep adapting. I guess that's what they have to do.
This is very bad PR for Google, and I would have thought just the publicity from this will have them thinking about whether this is an appropriate strategy for them.
Do no evil. You know, I mean, Google is all about honest information, and you know, I think it does damage them, and I think the name and shame will work here.
Sure,
and also with Romney, I mean, we've seen Romney's tax rate was what, 14.5%.
Less.
So yeah, so the rich individuals and the rich countries of the world should not be able to pay these tiny amounts of tax. It's just inequitable.
Yep.
I just don't know that there's going to be much they can do about it, really. I mean, apart from naming and shaming, as David Bradbury unusually did this week. I mean, that's
a pretty powerful weapon.
You're right. That's a powerful weapon.
They're clamping down on transfer pricing, which doesn't really affect these guys, and they're beefing up other parts of the Tax Act to try and get them somehow. And they've launched a panel, a think tank, to try and how can we do this.
And of course, speaking of taxation, the biggest story in tax in the world at the moment, I guess, is the US fiscal cliff, which has to be solved in part by taxes. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke might have been in New York this week, but he was really addressing Congress, urging an end to the fiscal cliff Brinkman